All right, well, good morning, everyone. My name is Christine Wielgos. Thank you, Randy, for allowing Pat and I to speak this morning on the damage surveys that occurred on after the December 10th tornado. Now, we were asked just to talk about the actual damage surveys and not talk about anything beforehand, so that's what we're going to focus on during our portion of the presentation. So, Pat was working on the day of the tornado. Steve, our MIC, and I were not, because we knew they were going to be needed for damage surveys, and boy were we. So we were in Mayfield the very next day, first thing in the morning, and we did have myself and Steve went out to Mayfield, and we did have another team go out and try to go further east on the track just to see what was going on. We didn't know what we were up against at that point. So the EOC for the event was in Mayfield at a bank, so we headed there first and then surveyed downtown. And my words to Steve, when we basically went to the hardest hit areas of downtown Mayfield, and we sat there, and my first words to him were, where do we start? There was so much damage, and it was just overwhelming because it was so vast. The amount of damage, it was a mile wide in most places. So again, our biggest issues were, where do we start? The damage was so widespread, and there was so much damaged. Completely destroyed structures, like the one you're seeing there in the upper right-hand corner. We didn't know what it was to begin with. So you're trying to pull up Google Maps to try to figure out, was it a one-story building? Was it a two-story building? What are we dealing with here? That's especially true when you're dealing with downtown, when you have a lot of different types of buildings that you're trying to assess. So that was a major problem. Even obviously early Saturday morning, there were still crews out doing recovery and rescue and trying to clear roads. There were power lines down everywhere, so we're trying to dodge those. You had excessive traffic, a lot of people looking around, trying to figure out what was going on, so dealing with that. And damage removal was already taking place. So, and this was the case for the following week. I was out every day for at least a week, if not more. And, when there's already damage removal taking place, you've got your evidence being taken away. And then because it's December, you have short days, so you had to get out early and get going, and know that you had only till about 4:30 before the sun started going down again. So on Saturday in the morning, it wasn't very long before I received a text that basically said, hey, there's a Black Hawk that's going to be landing in Mayfield, and if you want to take a ride and take a look at the track, you better get on it. So Pat and I took off at about 11:30 a.m. from Mayfield, and Steve remained on the ground in Mayfield to do some more surveying. And we actually were up in the helicopter for about 2 hours. It was about 2 hours, and we were able to survey the entire track, and it was very evident that it was a continuous path. The number of times that Pat and I looked at each other like going, oh my God, I can't even begin to tell you. Just the immense damage was, it's indescribable what we saw from the air. At least EF2 damaged the entire track, and we went all the way to the Tennessee border, so we knew, at least in our CWA, that it was a continuous path, starting at least the Tennessee border and then all the way east to where it ended. The amount of trees that we saw uprooted and snapped was just unbelievable. Again, the hundreds and hundreds of damaged structures and destroyed structures, and then the width of it. Of course, I wasn't seeing, he was seeing something from his side of the helicopter, and I was seeing something of my side. So, we both were seeing both sides of the damage, and it was pretty incredible. And so I'm going to just share a few of the aerials that I took. This is Casey, which is just north of the Tennessee-Kentucky line, right there through the heart of Casey, very small town. I think we're looking northeast across the center of Mayfield. Again, you can see how wide the damaged path really was, and we ascertained at least a mile wide in most locations. In some locations, it might have even been over a mile wide. This is the candle factory that all of you probably are sure aware of. It's in it's right over here, I believe. And Dawson Springs, I think, a lot of places impressed me, obviously, but Dawson Springs, just the amount of damage that was done, and just so like a drill bit coming out of the sky. It just so many people's lives were affected by this, and it was really became increasingly overwhelming emotionally as we went through the next several days. And then here's Bremen, a couple shots from there. So on Sunday, which was the very next day, We did have two teams go back out. Pat and one of our forecasters went out to Dawson Springs and Bremen. Again, they had trouble getting in because there was still rescue and search and rescue going on. We did have, thankfully, Christy Hurley, who probably is listening maybe. She was gracious enough to do the Kentucky and Tennessee tornado, another long track tornado to the south. And more survey teams were on the way, and that was a good thing. And Pat will talk about that a little bit here. Steve and I on Sunday went back southwest of Mayfield to find, to track the beginning of the tornado. So we went down to Casey, went down to the Tennessee border, crossed over the border, and found where it actually started in Tennessee. And then we surveyed back to the northeast toward Casey, back to Mayfield, and then we were called back to have meetings with the governor. We met with the governor, briefed him, and then he had briefings with the EMs, and then I had my first ever national press conference as a brand new WCM. I actually officially started on December 5th, so that was a hoot, dealing with all of that. So, but Pat and Steve were by my side the entire time, and it was a good thing, and it went very well. So we provided what little information we had at the time, which wasn't a whole lot. So. And then we had 60 Minutes, as a lot of you know. They arrived to talk about how they were going to conduct the rest of the week with us, and we had a very long day on Sunday with that.
So first, I want to talk a little bit about our overall strategy. Like Christine said at the beginning, you really didn't know the scope of what was going on, and then one of those overnight things, you wake up at 3 a.m. and go, okay, we need this, and this, and so. I called Chris Foltz, the Rock, Sunday morning, and kudos to him. I think he called me just about every hour that day to give me an update on the things that we needed. So the main things we needed were teams. We needed help. So he asked around, and we had a crew from Springfield and the crew from Lincoln came in, and their goal was to basically do the bulk of the survey, because the forecasters here were concerned about too many people leaving the office when we had so much work to do to support the recovery and the cleanup. So Springfield, they were here for 3 days. Lincoln was here for 2. And of course, Christine mentioned about Chrissy doing damage survey. That was an EF3 that handed it was in the southern sections. And so when we talked about the QRT initially Sunday morning with Chris, he said, well, let's try remote and let's see what happens. And by Sunday night, it was clear to me that I could not convey what I was seeing in words or even in pictures, and that we needed them here. And so I basically went into we had a QRT chat room. I went into the chat room and basically just said, so when are you coming? To try and, and they were here, Andy Bailey showed up the next day, and Brian Smith was here on Tuesday. So that was an incredible learning experience. Although I've surveyed an EF4 before, it was nothing like this. And having the connection with it, we had emotion. And Christine and Steve and I think other people who surveyed it from our office, you have all this emotion that's actually connected to it. And so that can be a problem when you're rating things. And so the QRT was here, they don't have that emotion. They're just like, here's the facts. And so that was, it was huge. And what an incredible learning experience for me, and I think for the others as well. So looking at the week ahead, damage surveys continued for the entire week. Christine was out, I was out, several people were out every day. Tim Marshall was in the area. He was in Mayfield on, let's see, it would have been Sunday, and I called him and we talked a little bit about what he saw in Mayfield, and he said, well, it's bad, but I said, wait, you got to come to Dawson Springs and probably over to Barnsley because it's worse here, and you'll that's where the debris ball was actually higher, the TDS was higher over in that area, it was stronger as it moved to the east. So Sunday night, 60 Minutes came here. We talked to the producers for a couple hours, and they came in. They followed us around Monday, and Tuesday morning is when we did the actual interview. And again, the staff here was extremely busy. We had DSS packets created for the tornado recovery, which of course were updated constantly. They were doing live interviews, TV, radio. You had Weather Channel, ABC's, New York Times, local media outlets, Fox Weather. We had just about everybody contact us. And of course, we had the questions of why the survey's not done yet. Everybody wants an answer the next day. You've seen 2 buildings. Well, what do you think it is? And of course, you don't know yet. So we were dealing with that, already questions about EF4 versus EF5 based upon the pictures that everybody's seeing. And so we're focusing, the forecast is really focusing on the tornado recovery aspect. We did have showers and thunderstorms coming back into the area. We had wind advisory because of the gusts that were going on, widespread locally heavy rain. So, and we actually set up a DSS support on site, not in Mayfield, but in the county next to it in Marshall County. We had someone there at their EOC supporting basically the entire tornado track from Benton. So what took so long? Well, we had 128 square miles of damage just in our CWA. So that took a while to get to. And we actually ended up surveying 616 points just on the EF4. So broke it down by county, Graves, we did 108. That's where Mayfield is. You go over to Princeton in Caldwell County, 100. And in Dawson Springs in Hopkins County, 131. But the key is that this could not have been done without mutual aid. We'd still be out there surveying this thing if we didn't have the help from Springfield, from Lincoln, and from Nashville, and the help that the Rock gave us. And actually, we didn't finish until February. And if we wanted, we could probably still go out and add a couple points. There's just that many. It was just such a large event. So the EF4 versus EF5 damage, we had what do you do? Well, yeah, I got to check not only at the house, but what's left of it. And, do the surrounding support an EF5? Was the landscape damage? Was it pulverized debris? Was it thrown downwind? Were vehicles torn apart and pieces blown well downwind? So one nice thing that was part of the QRT was that we actually had structural extreme events reconnaissance. And so we had actually other government agencies, members of academia. The University of Illinois was here. There were other, I think, universities in the area. They sent teams out and they assessed it. And actually they produced a report very quickly, within 2 weeks, on what they saw. And so while we don't have official government contacts with them, they're part of the QRT. And so we're making our determinations based upon information that they give us, and using their expertise, since we're not engineers, to help us inform us of what the EF rating should be.
Okay, so just really quickly on what they found. I thought it was, read through the report, and basically they found that the majority of the homes that they surveyed in Mayfield and Princeton, Dawson Springs, and Bremen, which were some of the hardest hit areas, that they were older buildings, and there was little to no wind uplift load paths. So there were weaknesses in the connections which caused the failure of the structure. And so they deduced that most of the homes were wood frame, constructed atop unreinforced masonry piers and stem walls. And so many of the failures were roof to wall and wall to foundation connections that caused the demise of the structure. I think that was the case for a lot of what we saw as well. And Pat will talk a little bit about that as well, what we saw south of Princeton and in Bremen. And they also ascertained that some of the damage may have been caused by trees or other debris that fell into the structure that caused some damage as well. So a very interesting report. And again, it mirrored what the QRT had come up with and our initial thoughts as well. So these were just a couple of the examples that they provided in their report. The floor to frame bottom plate connection failure, and then other issues with foundational connections. And so I won't go into too much detail for time here, but again, there were some, specific homes that they keyed in on these failures. But the one thing that I found very interesting is that they did key in on some of the things that did work. This house, if you saw pictures of the water tower that was collapsed in Mayfield, you can kind of see it there in the background on the right-hand side. This house was still standing, and none the worse for wear, really, except for some roof damage and some windows being blown out. But this home was constructed with hurricane straps that wrapped around the top of the wood trusses and connected them to the wood frame walls, which they claimed is what pretty much kept the house together. And so, that was just an example of a well-constructed home that was able to withstand these very, very strong winds. So when it comes to damage surveys, we are meteorologists, we're not engineers. So I think it's important, and this is something that we have stressed to all of the complaints of people that talked about whether it's an EF4 or an EF5. There's no exact rules. A lot of this can be subjective. It's not an exact science. It is evolving, and it has evolved. And so something that we talked about, Pat and I, is like, people want to compare this to, say, the Joplin tornado or the Tuscaloosa tornadoes or the EF5s. It's like, well, we've learned a lot since then. So it's not really fair to try to compare the two. So we have learned a lot in the last 10 years about wind resistance and structural engineering and things like that. And the EF sail is going to continue to be worked on, and it is being worked on. We're getting new DIs. We've got more experts looking at things. And I think it's heading in the right direction, but it is an evolving process. And I think that's important to keep in mind as we go through here. So the bottom line is, yes, our EF4 tornado that went through into Louisville's area was very similar to other EF4s and maybe even some EF5. The fact of the matter is that we had a lack of evidence that would have convinced us and QRT and the other experts that looked at the damage that this tornado crossed into the EF5 category. And again, people comparing it to the Joplin tornado, well, they had more substantially built structures that you can ascertain that EF5 rating. That wasn't the case for us with the December 10th. And I think Jim Ledoux or one of the other QRT members kind of brought this up as an example. You got a tornado that occurs in open country, but just demolishes a well-built barn. Well, you can only rate it in EF2. Could it have been rated higher? Could the winds have been higher in that tornado? Of course, but it didn't hit anything. And so there's no evidence to prove otherwise based on that damage. And so this tornado and its damage is going to be researched and looked at for many years to come. And evidence may eventually arise that will push it into the EF5 category. But for now, it's upper end EF4.
So real quick, just going into a couple pictures. These are thanks to Brian Smith. He had the before and we had the afters. So you got the First United Methodist Church. And again, there's no strict DIs for churches and how they're built. So the middle part of the church is gone. And the building on the right, again, if you did not know what it was beforehand, you'd have a hard time trying to determine what was going on afterwards. So we're going to go back. I'm dating myself now, doing the you make the call from the NFL and IBM. So we're going to present something to you and then ask you to rate it. So this is the Kentucky Agricultural Center. This is in Princeton, Kentucky. In the upper right, you can see the original structure and various pictures. The left-hand side of the building is all new construction, 2018, I believe. And so that's all new, but the right hand of the structure is older, and most of that survived, which was interesting. But it could have also just been what was the path of the tornado. So looking at the damage, it's a rebar city. There's rebars all over the place in everything just about. But what's important is this is how the cylinder blocks were actually connected to the foundation. There's no rebar going from the cinder blocks into the foundation. They were essentially sitting on these clips. So when you first come up to it, you're going, I've never seen anything like this. But as you drill down, and this is where Brian Smith helped with the QRT, he goes, look at this. This is really this is the key versus everything else. So based on what you have seen, what would you rate this as? A 2, 3, 4, 5? I don't think we have an E for a 6, but if you want to. So Okay.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow, I think it's pretty clear where we're going here. EF3. So we'll go ahead and close this poll in the interest of time, but it was rated an EF3. So that's what we did. So high-end EF2 into the EF3s. So that's what we rated this particular structure as. Okay, next one. Bremen, Kentucky. This was interesting. So there's 3 layers of concrete blocks. The bottom layer, where some of them, and you can kind of see an example here, where some of them are filled with cement, and there's actually kind of J-bolts that go into the ground from them. Then there's another layer that was put on top of those, and the center layer was filled with gravel only. Okay, the top layer, then, okay, the third layer, some of the blocks were filled with concrete, and it connected it to the sill. Okay, you look at the nailing on here is straight up. Okay, it's not toenailed. Okay, the entire house is gone. Okay, it was thrown into a nearby field, and the cement blocks, which you see in the lower 2 pictures here, that's basically part of the foundation that went with that top layer of cinder blocks. Now they survived because they had a storm shelter, and so they were in it. So this is a tough one. What are you going to rate this one? Interesting.
Very.
Yeah. So what we did, we actually rated, this is actually one of the highest rated structures. And the University of Illinois team came down and they agreed with the EF4 rating is what we gave that house. Because basically the whole house was lifted into the air. But what kept us from the ES5 is there were trees nearby which did not sustain major damage as what you would expect. So that's one of the things that kept us from doing that. So, you know, high-end EF3, we actually went high-end EF4 on this particular structure. Don't feel bad because we didn't give you everything. we just gave you a snapshot. So, you know, this is difficult on purpose, put it that way. So thank you for playing. So final points in the survey, we did have some issues with survey 1, 2, 3. If somebody out there knows how to do this, is we could not see the points we have already seen and put in without sending them in, and sometimes there's no cell coverage, especially after a major tornado. Science is happy we went with an EF4, but the people are not. We continue to get inquiries. You just got an email, what, a couple days ago on why is this not an EF5? Engineers have confirmed that complete destruction can happen with less than EF5 winds. And so far, the engineers have confirmed our EF4 rating, but we can always change that. We're not stuck in this and saying it's only an EF4 for sure. We find information or anything that leads us to an EF5, we'll change it. That's not a big deal. And real quickly, Randy wanted us to say something about mental health. And so we had Valerie Gardner visit the office in February, and she was absolutely fantastic. We had a full staff meeting, and then individual meetings were, set up if you wanted them. I think a good number of the staff took her up on that. I did. We reviewed the after action report. And again, if you have anything like this, and it maybe doesn't even have to be this scale, but I highly recommend that you bring her in. And as Steve said, our boss, I'd like to have her come in every year just to help the overall mental health of the staff. I mean, as meteorologists, we're involved in stress all the time, and it would really be nice to have that. So some of the issues, and this is not all of them, but some of the issues is like, who am I to feel this way when I have a roof over my head and You know, I'm perfectly fine, but yet there's people that don't have a house anymore. A lot of those houses are not insured. You know, I have a lot and they don't. And so there's part of guilt that goes on that. And it's still important to talk about it to help everyone move on. You know, I struggled the first couple weeks. It was a real, you know, personally, it really hit me. And then eventually, okay, I was able to move on. And Valerie was part of that moving on. Steve was part of that moving on. Christine was, but you know, everybody around me was part of that moving on. And so it's real important that if you have a situation like this, that you know, talk about it. That's what's important. So that's all we have. And now we'll give it back to Randy. Or if there's questions, we'll answer questions.
Thank you so much, Christine and Pat. Outstanding, just unbelievable looking at the damage and the extent that you talked about. How, you know, just that level of continuous damage, just so overwhelming. And yeah, and thanks for discussing the mental health aspect as well. I think that's something we're more cognizant of these days than we were 20 years ago. And it's something we have to keep an eye on each other, right, in our offices after these kind of events. So what we're going to do is we're going to hold questions until after John's portion of the presentation, and then we'll kind of have all three of you kind of serve as a panel, and we'll take questions at that time. So thanks so much, Christine and Pat, and we'll come back to you in a bit.
Okay.
So for now, I'm going to turn it over to John Gordon, MIC, WFO Louisville, and he's going to talk about the damage survey in their area following the same event. So thanks, John. Right now we see, okay, I see you sliding the presentation over. All right, looks great. Thank you very much for joining us today, John.
Thanks for having me there, Randy. So first I'll put a plug in for Valerie Gardner. I think anyone on this call, if your office has got issues with a major event, they never helped me when I worked big events, F3s, F4s, F5s, or big storms. She's an amazing resource, big fan. And by the way, Pat Spoden's retiring, so send a note in chat. Tell everyone how much you love Pat. He's a great guy, known him a long time. We're gonna miss you, Pat. So we're gonna talk about the Bowling Green tornadoes. And if you like Clint Eastwood, the good, the bad, and the ugly of an amazing event that went on and on and on. So this is also, like Randy Graham, this is an audience participation. So go to POLLEV.com with Randy Graham 936 or text Randy. Randy's waiting for your call right now on the air 24/7 in Kansas City. Give Randy that stuff, and we're going to do some polling questions. So Pat, make sure you log in. We want to make sure Mr. Spoden gets to vote. I love weather history. I think weather history is very key to look at these big events. Mark Jarvis was on the day shift lead forecaster, and he looked at the SIPS analogs. He went back and did all these historical events and tried to compare the current data set to what was going to go on. So we had some big events. I look at the QLCS event of April 19, 2011. Of course, the super outbreak that was nicknamed by Dr. Fujita in '74, the dreaded Quad State event, and then the Super Tuesday event of 2008. So that was one with supercells and QLCS. We are the QLCS office of the region. Not a good thing to be. QLCS is a royal pain in the behind, and we deal with a lot of them here. So one of the new tools the Met staff here really like is the EFI, the Extreme Forecast Index. I really think this is a good first look. We recently talked to SPC. Some of the SPC forecasters are even asking some of our folks about this. So we really use this a lot for these unusual events and different data sets. And the shift of tails. So those are all good things to look at. So here's your first polling opportunity. How often do you use the shift of tails? Pat, please vote. So we'll see how this is going. We got everything from never to routinely. So I would encourage you, if you're thinking about anomalous events, something you might be concerned of, just take a look. It doesn't hurt. And I know we're paying for that from the Euro Center in Bracknell. So one thing, I just added a slide yesterday. Our Sue Ryan Sharps had put this slide in. So before the outbreak, our WCM Mike Kochasik put a note out to our partners. When do you want briefing slides? What do you want in the slides before you even get a slide or two or whatever? So the question was, confidence is for a scenario, confidence is low for an impactful event 6 days out. What do you prefer? Do you want email briefing slides only? Do you want them with a conference call? You want no extra service? And then bottom below is confidence is medium to high for an impactful event 4 days out. What do you prefer? Same thing. You can look on there. We really are trying to come to grips of when we're going to do conference calls or not, because we can't do them for every single event. We can certainly put out information. We do the briefing slides 5, 6, 7 days out. We send one slider out and then ramp it up as it gets in there. So that's a late addition. This was in our area forecast discussion. I'm a huge proponent of the AFD. I used to argue with my former boss, Lynn Maximuk, about the AFD. You know, when they hit it off the web page, AFD is our signature product. And we should be playing offense, not defense with the AFDs. So if you look at the bottom part and highlight the coupled jet structure from the NAM, also reminds me a bit of the February 5th, 6th super outbreak or Super Tuesday outbreak that produced a nasty squall line with quite a few of those dreaded mesovortices. So that was in the discussion. Several of the media put that out in tweets. Someone at the Weather Channel sent me a note how they used that on the air. So do you use your historical weather information in your AFDs or social media to highlight the impact of an upcoming event? Look what happened in New Orleans yesterday. Do you think New Orleans was expecting a giant supercell tornado in the area? And when was the last time New Orleans even got hit? These are things that you can use and utilize and play offense. If Jim Scarlett's on the call, the MIC in Aberdeen, Pierre, South Dakota, I always say, get in the game, play offense, not defense. You're in March Madness. Do you want to lose or you want to keep going like St. Peter's? So I'm a big believer. Region didn't tell me what to put in here in case you're wondering. I don't swallow any Kool-Aid, but I believe in the RMA. I believe in it big time. Jack Hales is the one who came up with the MCD years ago at SPC at CELS. And I'm very behind, and as our staff is, of the RMA. This case, Keith Sherburne helped Dan McKinney, one of the best radar operators in the Weather Service. The supercell that was come flying out of Paducah's area that Pat and Christine just talked about, we were under some low-level sin. So Dan was concerned, can it maintain itself, this long-track supercell? Keith Sherburne, I owe you a lunch and a beer. I really appreciate your information, your constant data to give a soundbite, another listening ear, and someone who's gone through all that extra training and provide that insight to the warning operator. Well done. And then in the chat, this is from Dan, putting in crimson red about this storm flying out of Paducah's area. It's going to be in there next 30 to 40 minutes, extensive damage causing injuries and casualties. If it holds together, it could be one of the strongest storms to impact us in nearly a decade. I cannot understate how serious of a situation this is. Have gone ahead and issued a TOR warning way in advance. Incredibly dangerous situation, kind of like the old PDS out of SPC. So, have you given a strong note well ahead of a time for a high impact weather storm moving in your area? And lots of good numbers on that. If you're in the no category, please consider that. You know, some people on this call says, well, John, we don't get storms like that in our area. Well, I bet you might have a flash flood that might, or a fire weather situation, or others, a big dust storm, or whatever it is. So play offense. I love the data mesoanalysis stuff. This is the STP, the significant tornado parameter. You get instability, shear, and moisture all in one product. And, you know, we were in the warm sector for the Bowling Green event. So the sin had basically gone. So we issued a new downstream tornado warning, and we had to deal with not a QLCS and not a supercell, but a hybrid. So we had to deal with that. And there it is coming off the Hopkinsville radar. It was a hybrid QLCS structure, history of producing the tornadoes and damage, and not as consistent as the Hook that came flying out of Mayfield and Dawson Springs. Really good low-level environment. This is December, folks. before, and this is, you know, Santa Claus is coming, and we're dealing with supercells and QLCSs and hybrids. So we gave a heads up in the chat about a potential storm about 12:30, about 50 minutes before it hit, to let them know. And this was not a classic structure. This was not the Mayfield storm. We chatted with our partners on the potential for multiple tornadoes, and verification showed I was in Bowling Green for 8 days, so I know. So you have two different cells. The main one got choked off, the rear flank shut it off. The new cell's the northwestern one, and that actually spun a second one. There were two different tornadoes in the Bowling Green metro. So we had to deal with all that. Not an easy situation to deal with on radar. And there are the two different circulations you see on the right side. And, you know, kind of a hybrid. You see pendants, a bit of a hook there, and a really strong surge on the northwest side of the reflectivity gradient. As you can see, the RFD flying around and trying to pinch and almost do a double take to get two tornadoes going. So when I came in at 4 in the morning, we actually had a shift change at 4 in the morning. 3 people came in and 3 people left. You don't see that very often. And they were still issuing tornado warnings, and we had to start deciding where to go. So I went through all of these webcams and saw the power flashes, and that's always a good indication. And they used that during the event to go considerable. We probably, on our after action review, probably wish we had gone tornado emergency. Later in the day, this guy on Twitter, Ben Hockey, did some highlighting enhancement through his imagery and really got to show you a really nasty cell. A nasty tornado in the Bowling Green. It's the 3rd largest city in the state. So does your office create a map on where the survey crews are going to go and post it on social media and the web? I highly, highly, highly for the no's to change your ways. Play offense. Our maps are on all the TV stations in Louisville, and we serve 5 media markets. I've seen them on the Weather Channel. So I've seen it on CNN. So if you're in the know, change your ways. You can do it in Paint Shop Pro. If you don't know how to do it, contact Andrea Schuttmer, who's worked with Parks Camp on this. Play offense, not defense. Have you ever been on a Weather Service storm survey? And if you haven't, I hope your management staff lets you go. I usually take folks, especially who have an overall adrenaline of severe weather in them and glorification of it. Once you go out there and you see the coroner's vehicle at someone's house, 2x4s through cows, or what other unpleasant thing you might see, it really changes your perspective. Like Pat said a few minutes ago, you know, our houses are fine, but these folks lost everything. And this was before Christmas. I saw Christmas decorations up in the tops of trees. It changes your perspective. So this is, Pat gave you his stuff and Christine on the damage indicating. We took a lot of heat about the Creekwood subdivision. There were 8 homes that looked worse than all the other homes. So all the experts, it's amazing everyone's an expert on social media. It's just fascinating. So on damage indicator number 2, which is for the homes, we looked at those homes. We originally rated at 155, EF3. I contacted my buddy, Dr. Durkee from WKU Meteorology, and asked them if they had an engineering department. They said they did. And we got 2 engineers, structural engineers, and one was a home builder. So they went out with us, and I went and resurveyed those 8 homes and spent about 3 hours in 8 homes. So we had the meteorology students came along with us. We had airplanes, helicopters, and we are blessed to have the drones. So we're doing a test, so hopefully one day all of you can have drones. Dan McKimmey got the grant from through NOAA, and we're mainly doing this for hydrology, for river flooding. Marin's probably really happy about that, but we're using this, in this case, to look at the tornadoes. So God willing, this will work. So I flew the drone. This is, I think, Wednesday or Thursday. This is in the Trans Park of northeastern Warren County, northeast of Bowling Green. These are huge metal warehouses. It was a multiple vortex tornado, but I always, in surveying it for 8 days, there was one main funnel that did most of the heavy damage. There were lots of little funnels, but there was one that was probably, according to the one drone video, was about 37 yards wide. and where it hit was Armageddon, and next to it was just normal EF1, EF2 damage. So this is the Transpark drone footage, and it threw the debris half a mile down off to the east-northeast. But it's an amazing tool to use, and one day I hope all of you are able to utilize this. Let's get out of that. There we go. So years ago, one of our old leads here, Don Kirkpatrick, came up with this thing called PSAC, Post-Event Storm Assessment Coordinator. Try to say that fast 3 times. But we have a dedicated person in the office that handles all the survey crews, all the maps, the LSRs, the GIS, dealing with the media, and it's a very, very, very hectic note. And then they create these files in Google Drive of what they need to do, coordinate with the Civil Air Patrol, different survey maps, PNSs, storm summary pages, the interactive map that Andrea did that was on many, many news outlets across the country. So that was pretty amazing, over 11 days of surveying. It's like Pat said. So do you have a dedicated position to work with all the crews and help with this? So it looks like there's a horse race here between Secretariat and Man of War here. About split. It's a really good idea to consider having someone back in the office who can coordinate. Pat said they had a lot of crews. We had a lot of crews. We started, Saturday, we had 3 Sunday, 4 Monday, 4 Tuesday, 3 Wednesday, 1 Thursday. Then we had 3 days of rain. Then we started again on the following Monday. And I think we had 3 crews Monday and 1 Tuesday. So that's a lot of surveying. And I will say this real quick. The biggest outreach opportunity you have in your office is not the Silver Jacket meeting. It is not the Storm Spotter class. It is not the school talk. It is a storm survey. You get your biggest bang for your buck. It's the only thing the Weather Service controls. The only thing. The media wants to know. Government wants to know. The governor wants to know. President Bush years ago wanted to know about La Plata. I mean, the media wants to know. So I survey downbursts. We are the survey office. If you want to get your office visibility and get out in the community and listen to people and talk to people about, things from social science and is, nothing is better than going out and storm survey. So if I get a derecho or anything, we're going to survey for days and days and days. So we took the structural engineers out. It's all about relationships. If you don't have relationships, that wouldn't have even happened. He wouldn't have went with us. I think the QRT was in shock that we had engineers out with us. And we had the Civil Air Patrol. And we also had a bunch of pilots that Brian Schuttmer, one of our leads, I think he's got 45 pilots that fly for us free of charge that he's worked with over the years. So the Weather Ready Nation is about relationships. If you don't have those, it ain't going to happen. And then when you're surveying, everyone's bothering you. Next thing you know, out of the car with his men in the black glasses, there's Senator Paul. And I talked to him for a few minutes and about everything, the damage. And I just felt, like Pat said a few minutes ago, it is a very emotional, highly emotional going through all this. And I just said, I just can't believe we lost 17 people. And he says, I know your great warnings save lives, even though we lost so many. So, yeah, it's nice to hear that, but it doesn't change the facts. So it's good to have that. There was that interactive map we kept posting. We kept putting out lots and lots of tweets. Every time we put a tweet, it was amazing the response we got. Amazing. So that interactive map was well done and updated 2-3 times a day. Creekwood, let's talk about what Pat was doing. Pat gave you some questions of where to vote about the rating, but I'm telling you, my staff kept saying, do not go to social media, John. Do not go to social media. You're going to get mad. So finally I did one night and I did get mad. So these are the experts. These are the people who know who's going to win all the games. They know everything. These people on social media, it's stunning how much they know. It's an F5. Look at that. Only an F5 can form a wedge tornado less 200 miles. First off, people wanted to argue with me that this was the Mayfield tornado. It was not the Mayfield tornado. But people would swear they'd bet me $1,000. I'm like, you're just nuts. It was not the one that hit this area. And we just had all these people telling us there were a bunch of, and there's a lot of bleeps in here. Randy Graham told me I could not have an X-rated discussion here, but there's just F-bombs after F-bombs after F-bombs that we're a blankety blank, 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 blank idiots. So has your office received extreme dissent, vulgarity, downright vile Recalcitrant behavior logged against your office for a damage survey. Yeah, I'm sorry you have. And that's Derek DeRoche's next seminar, how to deal with vile, disgusting, vile people. And there's more of it. You know, some of these ratings are suspect. It's like they're too afraid to give out higher ratings. Yeah, that's right, Jimmy. That's what I did. It's a conspiracy. So we worked our buns off for 7-8 days down there with engineers, and I feel very confident at 165. We met with the QRT. At most, we were going to go up 5 miles an hour, and we all felt very comfortable with that number. So they were right. I shouldn't have looked on social media. Mutual aid, Pat Spoden hit that really hard as we wrap up. Jackson sent a WCM in a vehicle. I needed a vehicle badly. Our friends in Nashville, by the way, Larry Venozzi's last day is tomorrow. He's retiring the MIC. And they surveyed Monroe County for us, and lots of volunteering. The staff bent over backwards. Everyone was switching their shifts, and we provided daily DSS. So it's nice to get compliments from the governor about the lives we saved in Paducah and Nashville and Memphis. All the St. Louis got hit very hard, that Amazon building. You know, from conference calls to graphics, our state director says with confidence bars, they love the slider bars, the confidence bars. And that day we had between moderate and high in tornadoes on that day. So it's nice to get that. This was pretty powerful. I had a lot of tears. It's good to bring a hanky for things like this and tissues. The morning after the tornado ripped through, I met this lady. She told us that she heard the warning. I think there were 32-minute lead time. She grabbed 6 of her kids and she crammed in a bathtub and she just laid on them with a mattress. The only thing left standing in her entire house was the bathroom wall. That's it. And she said, and she gave me this big hug and thanked us for saving their lives. There's the before and after. This is in Ohio County of a building or of a house, and you see before after. I don't know, it's just kind of more dramatic there. And if you want to send me a note at john.gordon.gov, or you can follow me at Mamadas, man. Without further ado, it is time for the Randy Graham question and answer period.